When you get hurt, your first instinct isn't to vent, it's to shut down and push people out. This is how your brain protects you and sabotages you. There's something almost invisible happening inside certain people. Something that nobody talks about openly because it doesn't make easy sense from the outside. You don't scream. You don't call someone at midnight crying. You go quiet. You disappear into yourself like a door slowly closing. And the people around you? They feel it. They reach out and you pull back. They ask what's wrong and you say nothing. It's not that you're cold. It's not that you don't care. It's not that you want to be alone forever. It's something older than that. Something that formed before you even had words for it. Something your nervous system decided long before you could choose. People see the distance and call it attitude. They see the silence and call it manipulation. They see the walls and call it emotional unavailability. But none of that is accurate. Not really. What they're seeing is a system in protection mode. A person doing the only thing that ever felt safe. Here's a question worth sitting with quietly. When did closeness start to feel dangerous? Not uncomfortable, dangerous. When did needing someone begin to feel like a risk you couldn't afford? Most people assume that pushing others away is about not wanting connection. But that's the wrong reading entirely. It's almost always about wanting it too much. The pain isn't in not caring. The pain is in caring so deeply that being hurt by someone close feels absolutely catastrophic. Unbearable even. So the nervous system does what it was designed to do. It creates distance before the damage can get worse. It builds space as a form of armor. This is called a withdrawal response. And it doesn't come from nowhere. It was built quietly over time through experiences that taught you something specific. It taught you that when you're vulnerable, you get hurt. That when you open up, something closes around you. That people, even ones you love, can become unsafe. At first, the withdrawal was situational. Maybe you pulled back after one specific betrayal. One moment where you reached out and got nothing back. Then it happened again. And again. And slowly, the withdrawal stopped being a reaction and started becoming a reflex. Automatic. Preemptive. Protective. Eventually, you didn't even wait to be hurt. You began creating the distance yourself before anyone had the chance to leave. Because leaving first hurts less than being left. Think about a specific moment. You're in pain, real deep pain. Someone who loves you comes close and asks if you're okay. And something inside you shuts like a lock. You say you're fine. You move away. You maybe even feel irritated by their presence, though you can't explain why. And later, alone, you wonder why you did that. That moment isn't strange. It isn't broken behavior. It's a nervous system that learned to associate closeness with eventual pain and is now acting on that learning. There are several layers to this pattern, and they don't all look the same. The first layer is self-preservation, keeping the wound from being touched by someone who might make it worse. The second layer is something quieter. It's the fear of being truly seen when you're at your lowest. Vulnerability in pain feels different from vulnerability in joy. When you're hurting, you're exposed in a way that feels shameful. Letting someone witness that feels like handing them something they could use against you later. The third layer is exhaustion. When you're hurt, your emotional energy is already depleted. Explaining yourself, managing someone else's reaction, performing okayness, it all costs more than you have. So isolation isn't chosen because you want to suffer alone. It's chosen because it requires nothing from you. And when you're depleted, nothing feels like everything. There is a fourth layer that rarely gets named. It's the quiet belief that your pain will burden the people you love. That your hurt will become their problem and they'll resent you for it. So you protect them by disappearing. You tell yourself you're doing them a favor. And in that strange, inverted logic, pushing people away becomes an act of love. But here's where the pattern begins to cost you something real. The very thing you built to protect connection slowly starts to erode it from the inside. People stop reaching out as much. Not because they stopped caring, but because they learned that you disappear when things get hard. They got tired of knocking on a closed door. And then something painful happens. You interpret their distance as proof that you were right. That people leave. That closeness was never safe. The cycle confirms itself. This is what psychologists sometimes call a self-fulfilling relational pattern. You expect abandonment, so you create conditions that make abandonment more likely. Not consciously. Never consciously. It's one of the cruelest loops a person can live inside. Because the evidence keeps mounting and all of it points in the same direction. Away from trust. Away from openness. And the loneliness that builds in that space isn't simple. It's layered. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't really know where you go when you hurt. There's also something happening in the mind during these periods of withdrawal that deserves attention. The silence outside doesn't create silence inside. It creates the opposite. When you push people away and go quiet, your thoughts get louder. You replay the hurt in detail. You analyze it from every angle. You build entire courtrooms inside your head. You argue both sides. You justify your withdrawal and then question it. You miss the people you pushed away and then remind yourself why you pushed them. It becomes exhausting. This is the inner conflict that lives at the center of this pattern. You want connection desperately, and you are simultaneously doing everything in your power to avoid it. Two truths exist inside you at the same time. I need people, and I cannot let people in right now. Both feel completely real. Both feel completely necessary. Neither cancels the other out. This kind of internal contradiction doesn't mean you're confused or unstable. It means you're carrying two very human needs that haven't yet found a way to coexist peacefully. The overthinking that comes with isolation isn't weakness either. It's an attempt to process pain without external support. Your mind is doing alone what it was meant to do in relationship. But the mind without a witness has limits. It can loop endlessly without resolution. It can deepen wounds instead of healing them, simply because there's no outside perspective to interrupt the spiral. And yet, even knowing this, the walls stay up. Because the alternative still feels too dangerous. Because trust, once broken in the right places, doesn't rebuild itself quickly or easily. Here is something important to hear and to really let in. This pattern is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you as a person. It is an adaptation. A sophisticated, intelligent response to an environment that taught you certain things about safety and people and what happens when you let your guard down. Your nervous system did its job. It watched, it learned, it adjusted. It built a system designed to keep you from being destroyed by the thing that almost destroyed you before. The problem isn't that the system exists. The problem is that it can't always tell the difference between someone who is safe and someone who isn't. It treats everyone like a potential threat. A nervous system stuck in protection mode doesn't pause to evaluate. It reacts. And in reacting, it sometimes pushes away the exact people who would have actually stayed, who actually wanted to. So what does movement look like for someone living inside this pattern? It doesn't look like tearing the walls down overnight. It doesn't look like forced vulnerability or aggressive openness. It looks smaller than that. It looks like noticing first. Just noticing when the door inside you starts to close. Not stopping it immediately, just observing that it's happening. That moment of awareness is not nothing. It's actually the beginning of something important. Because you cannot change what you cannot first see. And seeing it clearly changes your relationship to it. The next small step is choosing one person. Not many. One. Someone who has shown up consistently, quietly, without demand. And offering them something small and true when you're hurting. Not the whole story. Not the full wound. Just a sentence. Something like, I'm not okay right now, but I don't know how to talk about it yet. That's enough. That's actually a lot. What you're doing in that moment is interrupting the automatic response. You're introducing a small pause between the pain and the disappearance. A tiny crack of light in a closed door. It won't feel natural at first. It will feel exposing and uncomfortable and possibly wrong. That discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something bad. It's a sign that you're doing something new. And new things, especially in the territory of emotional safety, always feel uncertain before they feel right. That's not a warning sign. That's just how change moves through a nervous system. It moves slowly. It moves quietly. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic shift in personality or a sudden fearlessness. It arrives in small, almost invisible moments of chosen trust. One honest sentence to one safe person, then maybe another. Not because vulnerability is easy, but because isolation has its own cost, and you're finally willing to feel that cost clearly. There's something else worth understanding about the people who carry this pattern. They are often the most emotionally perceptive people in any room. Deeply attuned, quietly observant. They notice everything. The shift in someone's tone, the slight change in energy, the unspoken tension beneath a casual conversation. Nothing gets past them because nothing ever could afford to. That level of perception was also learned. When your environment was unpredictable, reading people accurately became a form of survival. You had to know what was coming before it arrived. And so you developed a kind of emotional intelligence that most people never build. Not because you're exceptional by nature, but because your circumstances demanded it from you early. That attunement is a real gift. It makes you someone who understands people deeply, who feels things fully, who can sit with others in their pain without flinching or rushing toward a fix. But it also means you feel hurt more acutely than most. When something wounds you, it doesn't just scratch the surface. It lands somewhere deep, somewhere that was already tender and familiar. This is why the withdrawal can feel so total, so complete. Because the pain itself is total. And a total pain seems to call for a total response. Shutting everything out. Becoming unreachable. What looks like overreaction from the outside is actually a precisely calibrated internal response to a very real level of pain. The scale matches. It just isn't visible to anyone watching. And that invisibility is its own kind of loneliness. Being in tremendous pain that no one around you can see or measure or fully understand. Hurting in a language no one else speaks. This is why so many people with this pattern eventually stop expecting to be understood. Not bitterly, not with anger, just quietly. They lower the expectation and carry the weight themselves. There's a kind of dignity in that self-sufficiency. A quiet strength that develops when you've had to be your own consistent source of comfort and steadiness across long stretches of time. But dignity and loneliness can exist in the same body at the same time. And the loneliness doesn't disappear just because you've learned to carry it gracefully. It just becomes more silent. The question isn't whether you can survive alone inside your pain. You've already proven that you can. The question is whether surviving alone is the only option you're willing to believe in. Because there is a version of this where the walls become thinner without disappearing entirely. Where you stay protected and also let something real and warm occasionally pass through. Not a demolition. A door. One that you control. One that opens from the inside, on your terms, at your pace. That's not weakness. That's a profound form of reclaimed agency. Think about what it would feel like to be hurt and not completely alone in it. To have even one person sitting nearby who doesn't need you to explain everything or perform recovery. Someone who just stays. Who doesn't panic at your silence or push at your walls or make your pain about their discomfort. Someone whose presence asks nothing but offers something steady. That kind of company exists. It's rarer than it should be, but it exists. And part of the work is learning to recognize it, to let yourself believe it when it shows up in front of you. You were taught, through experience, that closeness leads to pain. That's a real lesson drawn from real events. But it is not the only lesson available. It is not the final truth about people. Some people will confirm your fear. And some people, quietly and without announcement, will slowly disprove it. The work is staying open enough to notice the difference between them. That openness doesn't mean being naive. It doesn't mean abandoning your perceptiveness or ignoring the signals your body sends about safety. It means holding your history without being entirely ruled by it. Your past is real. What happened to you was real. And you are also here, now, in a present moment that is not identical to the past, even when it sometimes feels that way. The nervous system lags behind reality. It responds to echoes. And part of healing is gently, repeatedly, showing it evidence that the present is different. That not every room is the one that hurt you. This is patient work. It doesn't happen in a single revelation or a perfectly timed conversation. It happens in accumulated moments of small safety, slowly registered, slowly believed. You are not broken for needing that time. You are not difficult for needing that proof. You are someone whose trust was expensive to earn because you learned early that it should be. That discernment, that careful guardedness, that measured pace, none of it is something to be ashamed of or rushed past. It is actually one of the most honest things about you. And somewhere beneath all the protection, beneath the silence and the distance and the carefully maintained walls, there is still someone who wants to be known. Fully. Safely. Without performance. That wanting never left. It just learned to stay quiet. It learned to wait. And the fact that it's still there, still present after everything, says something profound about your capacity for hope. Not loud hope. Not optimistic declarations. Just a small, persistent, deeply human reach toward something real. Toward someone who stays. Toward a closeness that doesn't eventually cost you everything. If something in these words landed somewhere familiar, sit with that recognition for a moment. You don't need to act on it immediately. Just let yourself be seen, even if only by yourself, right now. And if this kind of quiet psychological exploration speaks to something in you, consider staying close to this space. There's more waiting here for the part of you that's still learning to come home to itself. There is one final thing worth saying, and it's perhaps the most important thing of all. The version of you that pushes people away is not your worst self. It is your most exhausted self. It is the part of you that has been carrying too much for too long without adequate rest or witness or relief. It is not a villain in your story. It is a survivor doing its best. And survivors deserve something more than just endurance. They deserve the slow, careful, revolutionary experience of being genuinely safe. Not perfectly safe, not permanently safe, just safe enough. Safe enough to exhale. Safe enough to lower the shoulders that have been raised in quiet tension for longer than you probably realize. Safe enough to let one honest moment exist without immediately regret. That's the destination. Not fearlessness. Not total openness. Not a personality transplant or a sudden transformation into someone who finds vulnerability effortless and connection uncomplicated. Just safe enough. Just present enough. Just willing enough to let the door open, slightly, occasionally, for the people who have quietly earned that small and significant privilege. Because here is what becomes possible in that space. Not grand romantic connection or perfect understanding or relationships without friction. Something quieter and more sustaining than any of that. What becomes possible is being known. Really known. In your complexity and your contradictions and your carefully guarded interior life. Known by someone who chose to stay after seeing all of it. That experience, even once, even imperfectly, changes something in the nervous system that years of self-sufficiency cannot touch. It rewrites a small but crucial part of the story you've been telling yourself. The story that said people leave. The story that said closeness is dangerous. The story that said the only reliable safety is the kind you build entirely alone, with no one else inside it. One experience of being truly held in your pain, without consequence, without loss, begins to create an alternative narrative. It doesn't erase the old one, but it sits beside it as a counterweight. And over time, with enough of those small moments accumulated quietly, the counterweight begins to matter. The scales begin to shift. Not dramatically, just perceptibly. Just enough to breathe differently. This is what healing actually looks like for people who carry this pattern. Not a breakthrough moment. Not a sudden opening. A gradual, almost imperceptible softening over a long stretch of lived time. You may not even notice it happening. You may only recognize it in retrospect, looking back and realizing that somewhere along the way, you stopped disappearing quite as completely when things got hard. That you lingered a little longer before closing the door. That you let someone sit nearby even when you couldn't speak. That you stopped pretending to be fine quite as quickly as you once did. Those are not small things. Those are enormous things wearing quiet clothes. Those are evidence of a nervous system slowly learning to update its oldest and most deeply held instructions. And they deserve to be recognized as the profound acts of courage they actually are. Not because they look heroic from the outside. They don't. They look ordinary. But they feel like mountains from the inside. Every person who carries this pattern knows exactly what it costs to stay in the room when everything inside is screaming to leave. To answer honestly when the automatic answer is fine. To say I'm struggling instead of I'm tired. To let someone see the real expression on your face instead of the managed one. To resist the pull toward isolation for one more moment than you did last time. These are the real victories. Unmeasured by anyone else, largely invisible to the outside world, but registered deeply and permanently within your own developing sense of what is possible for you. You are not destined to be alone in your pain forever. That is not the fixed truth of your life, even if it has been the recurring pattern of it. Patterns are not destinies. They are habits, and habits can change. Slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and reclosings and moments where the old response comes roaring back with full force. That's not failure. That's the nonlinear reality of how human beings actually change. You are allowed to be in process. You are allowed to be somewhere in the middle of this, not fully closed and not yet fully open, navigating the complicated and tender territory between protection and connection. That middle place is not a failure state. It is actually where most of the real living happens. In the negotiation between safety and risk. Between self-protection and self-disclosure. Between the walls and the door. If you've read this far, something in you is listening for something. Maybe recognition. Maybe permission. Maybe just the relief of having an inner experience named out loud without judgment or prescription. Whatever brought you here, you are not alone in this particular kind of quiet struggle. There are more people living inside this pattern than you would ever guess from their composed and self-sufficient exteriors. They are in the rooms around you, carrying the same weight, asking the same silent questions, wanting the same things and fearing the same things in almost exactly the same proportions. And perhaps that shared humanity, that knowledge that this specific interior experience is not yours alone, is its own small form of connection. Invisible, indirect, but real. A thread between people who understand without needing to explain. You don't have to have it figured out. You don't have to be healed to be worthy of closeness. You just have to be willing, occasionally, in small ways, to let someone try to reach you. And to not immediately make them wrong for trying. That's enough. That's where it starts. Not with a grand decision or a permanent transformation, but with one moment of staying, when everything in you wanted to go. Stay with what this brought up in you. Let it sit without immediately resolving it. And if this spoke to something real, there is more here, waiting for the part of you still learning that being found doesn't have to mean being hurt.